it was just nice to be back. I wasn't expecting to love it at all. I was like, well, this will just be a thing. Like, I'm going back to it out of necessity because I know how to do it. I know how to be a waiter. It was like coming up for air, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for a year.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. As consumers, we often focus on food a restaurant serves, the talent of a chef, the way they celebrate the seasons, their ability to find balance and harmony. But food is only one part of the equation when it comes to restaurants. The art of great service is as important as the food in hospitality venues. But what does it take to deliver those magical experiences? Nikki Friedli is an award-winning front-of-house professional and currently working at Templo in Hobart, Tasmania. Nikki, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you going?
Good. You've found yourself in Tasmania during a pandemic. Well, what lured you to the Apple Isle?
December 2019, I sold off my portion of Africola back to my business partners, and decided it was time to start another adventure. And I didn't really know what that was going to be at the time. But I suppose 3 weeks later, I was sitting on a beach having an existential crisis about what I was going to do with my life and my career, because Africola really had been all consuming at a very formative period of my life, sort of between 23 and 28, 29, which, for me, it was a big deal. And it took up everything that I was, really. There was really no distinction between myself and the four walls that I existed in. So I was sort of looking for something else to do, and bizarrely, Mona was advertising on Seek for a I know. Wasn't expecting to see that there. I originally when I clocked the job, I called Pip Anderson, who's the head of hospitality there, and I asked her if it was like a art installation or like a joke listing. I just assumed that Mona would never have to advertise. But there was a job going for their functions and events manager, and I just thought that I would throw my hat in the ring and do that, and the job came through. So I went to get on a plane and disappear down to Tassie, but 2 days before I was meant to fly, COVID hit properly, and I wound up stranded in Adelaide for until the gallery reopened, really. So there's a little bit of a delay, but I feel like compared to what a lot of people have gone through lately, I've been pretty fortunate. That's really the greatest impact it's had for me.
What was it like having your life sort of halted like that, and then filling in that period of time, that gap, given, that COVID sort of shut borders and things like that?
Do you know what? For me, it was actually a lifesaver, quite literally. By the time I was finished at Africola, my mental and physical health was absolute cactus. I would say I was probably at one of the lowest points of my life, I think. It's just so, it's a beast of a place. And I think when you're young, especially, it's difficult to set boundaries around yourself and to not completely lose who you are to a venue, especially when a place is so your home. And I really grew up there. It was a first for so many things for me, that I just completely ignored any and all warning signs from my body and my brain that I should slow down, because, there's always that thing in the background in hospitality that I think is quite toxic, although I think it is definitely shifting away, that if you're not working 80 hours a week, you're not doing it right. And And really, I mean, by the time I stopped really doing that at Africola, it was already too late. I'd done the damage to myself. So to be honest, I think that COVID forced me to stop, and forced me to address my mental health, my physical health, my overall well-being, to address what I wanted in my life, what my priorities were, and to reassess from there. So really, it was just a year of massive growth for me, and I feel really fortunate that was the case. I mean, in terms of work, I just kind of was a little bit of a gun for hire around Adelaide for a little while. I've flapped about at Lee Street Wine Room for a bit. They lovingly took me in, adopted me as a stray. So I was just casual there, slinging drinks and having fun and enjoying not being the person that people called when things went wrong. It was finally not my section chef. So it was a good feeling.
That time that COVID gave you to reflect and work on yourself, how much has that opportunity and that self-reflection changed you?
I feel almost unrecognizable from the person that I was in 2019. It's a long pause. I'm just thinking. I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've had pretty significant issues around anxiety and around trauma. And the funny thing about trauma and the way it manifests is that actually it sets you up to be really great at service. And so for a long time, things that I almost took for, borderline feeling like a superpower in service were actually signs that I was struggling with significant mental health issues, really. So, it's common when you have trauma that you develop this really unique ability to have almost like hyper awareness of your situation and of the people around you. And so as a defense mechanism to stop you from being hurt again, you basically learn how to break down and assess people really fast. And then you kind of adapt and mold who you are and what you are to suit the person who's standing in front of you. Which when you're doing it right, and I think if you're doing it in a healthy way, can be a really beautiful thing to gift somebody. As a waiter, I often sort of think of my job as you're kind of like this little floating human panacea in a way. Like you hold a mirror inside of you when you're talking to people, and you have this really lovely, unique opportunity to reflect the best of what they are back to them in an interaction with you, which can be a really beautiful thing. And I love it, and I love that. And I always have, and it's what's always drawn me back to being a waiter. But if it comes from a place where there is an undercurrent of kind of like needing the high to survive and needing people to be able to like you and love you immediately and base your value as a person on those interactions is where it gets dangerous. And when you have residual trauma issues, your self-worth often well, at least for me, I mean, I can't speak broadly for everybody, but I found that, I was taking those interactions to be the foundation of my worth. And so if I ever caught myself underperforming or not achieving or not delivering or just being less than, I definitely didn't take it very well. So it's been long and difficult, especially when, being a waiter and interacting with people in such a simple but intimate way was taken away from me in a sense by COVID initially, and then, by just my failing mental health initially, and then by COVID sort of secondary to that. it gave me time to reset, I suppose.
How did you find space to reset? What were the things that you allowed yourself to find yourself again?
Funnily enough, it was a lot of doing nothing. It really was. And it was sitting in the sun in my garden, or sleeping for 16 hours in a day, or drinking coffee, or reading a book that I loved. I wish that there were, or it was, really intense things like standing in the shower and crying for 3 hours, or letting my body experience dysregulation. So, like nervous system dysregulation is like a big part of having, like, dealing with trauma, really. Like, my nervous system's a bit weird, and like when I have an anxiety attack, like, I'll shake or I'll experience it really viscerally. And like, my brain shuts down. I just can't function. And so, like, letting my body, and I won't necessarily even be in a situation that is triggering. I could have just been at home washing the dishes, and all of a sudden that wave hits me. And just being able to be in the position where I can ride it out in a way that is safe, and I'm not having to go back out onto the floor and repress it and pretend that everything is fine. Which I did a lot of, like, it's really funny, like, hearing award-winning before my name, because at the time that, I won the Good Food Guide Award, I think it might have been one of the most isolating and difficult times of my life. I remember being in service, and I would go out into the alleyway out the back of Africola, and between, serving people and having this face and, like, loving my job and really enjoying it still, I would be just crashed upon with, like, wave after wave after wave of anxiety, and I would be vomiting into a storm drain and shaking uncontrollably and stressed, and then I would just walk back into a restaurant like nothing else was going on. And so I started to create this almost like Jekyll and Hyde kind of monster out of myself, just out of necessity, really. So honestly, just like reuniting those two parts of myself that I had tried to keep away from each other for such a long time was a lot of what I was doing when I was outwardly sort of doing nothing during that sort of no man's land of the COVID period, which was quite intense.
This is not uncommon to the hospitality sector. Strenuous hours, long hours, throwing yourself and committing yourself to something you believe in, whether it's the restaurant or the food. Do you think people are seeing things differently out of COVID, and taking a check on their careers and how they approach the amount of hours they do and things?
Oh, I think hugely. I think that COVID, from a business perspective, from hospitality, has been devastating, and ultimately very draining, really difficult for people. But I've had several conversations with people where, there's also a sentiment there of like, oh, this is what it feels like to have time for myself. This is what it feels like to take care of myself properly. I feel like a different person when I sleep at night. I'm not constantly on the brink of collapse, like just all these things where, I've heard so many people say, like, I'm never going back to that 70-hour a week with no paid overtime life. People realizing that it's not worth it. And for so long, I feel like for our industry, we just, I don't know what it is in us. And I feel like it's something that I don't know if it's like, I don't know what comes first, whether you have it in you already, and so therefore you can cope with hospitality and you stay in it, that like need to drive and push and always be at the forefront, or whether it puts it in you. I don't know which way it goes. But it feels distinctly to me like people are starting to say no to doing those things or negotiating harder for their rights. And, like I feel like hospitality really, if we have a union, I definitely don't know about it. Or I don't know what it's doing or if it ever has done anything. And I think that COVID in particular really showed just how ill-equipped we are to make sure that we're actually taking care of ourselves as an industry and also as individuals by having real boundaries laid out and real parameters and real guidelines for people to fall back on a proper support network. And that's sort of in everything from issues around what casual pay rates look like to working unpaid overtime to the expectations of an 80-hour week and leave, how we interact with all of those things, I think was really highlighted by COVID and has given people time to take stock because who wants to go back to living that way?
When you realised you needed to make some changes to take care of yourself, how hard was it taking the first steps?
Oh, pretty brutal. But I think I just didn't have a choice at that point, really. The burnout was so severe and so real. I mean, the first step of doing nothing was one of the hardest things I've ever done because I don't like to be idle. I don't enjoy it. I definitely equated busyness with worth, which I think is something that we tend to do a lot in our industry. And in particular, I think when you're front of house, because ultimately the product that I provide is invisible. That's why there's no fucking waiter's table, is there? So there's be a lot of classical music and sad, tired people eating dinner next to a fucking bin sitting on a milk crate. Oh, the glamour. It's definitely not as sexy as a Francis Malman fire pit, that's for sure. So how do you quantify an emotional experience? How do you quantify someone coming in who's had the worst day of their life, perhaps, and you have a 2.5, 3 hours with this person, and you sort of, you do that thing that in first aid they never tell you to do, which is where if you get bitten by a snake, don't suck the poison out. Waiters volunteer to just walk up to people and put their mouth on the wound and just suck the poison out. That's what we do. Which, visually is a weird thing to put on a show. I'm sure it's an OnlyFans somewhere, but it's, it's what we do, and it's a hard thing to explain or to impart to people. And it's it's funny, I feel like when you're getting good service, you don't know it and you don't notice it because that's the hallmark. You know what I mean? Whereas when it's not there, it's distinctly not there. And it's why didn't I enjoy that as much as I should have? The food was good and it was nice, but ultimately, I feel a bit weird and a bit empty and there was not that love. But there's just no way to put it in a jar and give it to somebody. So, sorry, I think I've rambled. I've gone off topic, as I'm wont to do.
You spoke about when you won that award for service with a Good Food Guide, a national award. And at that time, you were struggling with your own mental health, but you are renowned as one of the best front of house professionals in the country. What is it that lured you to hospitality? It's a good question. Ultimately, hospitality is
really well geared for how my brain likes to work. Generally, like just the structure of my brain, I think, fits really well inside what hospitality demands of us front of house wise. So like on the fly problem solving, constant stimulus, a lack of it's really like you never step into the same river twice. You're dealing with the greatest irrational factor on the planet that has no rhyme or reason, which is human behavior. We are not rational actors at all. And so it means that things are constantly in a state of flux and there is never not a challenge, even on a calm day. So it was that endless dynamic and knowing that I would never be sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, bored out of my mind. That really lured me in. And ultimately, like, I know it's like very cool to hate people, hate other people, you know, like, oh, people. But like, I ultimately like really, I love interacting with other people and I am fundamentally curious about what makes other people tick. And I want to know everything about them all the time and why they do the things that they do and how they do them. And I have this like really broad set of interests. Like when I tried to go to university on multiple occasions, I inevitably sort of found myself doing a lot of politics and history subjects. And I really enjoy politics. Again, because it's one of those things where it's ultimately just, it's about people. But hospitality has like this perfect intersection to me of politics and an overlap of things to me that are vitally important, which is people need to be fed and they need to be watered. And it's been the backbone of what society is and how we all function together. And it's political because food encompasses everything from cultural differences to things like food scarcity to class systems to, it's all there in what we have on the plate. And there's this really unique opportunity where you can be anybody and go to any restaurant. Obviously, there's, issues around money being a barrier and etc. But I mean, as a general rule, especially with Afro-Cola, I'd say I've got a pretty broad spectrum of people. And I kind of love the fact that I could have someone super conservative, has opinions that are drastically different to mine. And because in the space of an evening, they've relaxed, they're having a nice time, they're having a good experience, they're feeling positive and therefore kind of cracked open a little bit. There's this unique opportunity for, to be able to sort of subversively influence how they think. Maybe they walked in feeling like, I don't know, pick a topic. I think so once I had a guy, like an older gentleman come in who was really just on this, I don't even know how we got onto the topic or why we were talking about it, considering I was a waiter at the table. But for whatever reason, somehow abortion came up. I think there was like legislation going around. I was at the table when these two old white guys were talking about it. And just, what their concept of choice and their biases around what women going through this process happened to be. And because I happened to be holding the wine and a nice woman who was around and serving them things, they came in with quite a conservative, narrow-minded opinion and had a little bit of discourse with me because, unfortunately, I can't help myself. And it was my restaurant, so I could say what I wanted. was, pouring them wine, and I was like, well, actually, like, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. All these things that you think are just fundamentally wrong. And in a situation where normally it would have been like, I think, quite a confrontational conversation to have, being full of chicken and wine sort of took the sting out of it. And I wound up having a 20-minute conversation about pro-choice and the importance of funding for, for clinics, and it wound up being really positive. And when one of them was leaving, he was like, thank you for having that conversation with us. Like, I've been given a lot to think about, all these things that I'd never considered in my life. There's not many places you get to kind of have those opportunities in a meaningful way and in a safe way, which is quite nice. So really, I think it's like, I like hospitality because I get to be subversively bossy and push my agenda on everybody. But it's just, I don't know, it's just important. It's just an important thing to have. And I like that food and drink are a universal language. That makes me feel settled and grounded. I do it because I can't imagine doing anything else.
This episode is proudly supported by Montague, handpicked for you.
The things that we're really looking for in plums, first of all, they've got to be sweet. We're really looking for a full flavour explosion in our plums. Red flesh is critically important to us, higher in antioxidants, so all that good stuff. And then we're also looking to add a slightly firmer texture, so there's almost a little crunch. That's the real driver for us.
For more information, go to montague.com.au.
You were one of the key reasons for Africola's success, and I know that you really threw yourself into that restaurant and it took its toll on you. But what were some of the positives to come out of those formative years for you that built your career?
Oh, so many things. Africola was great because it let me explore things and do things my way. It definitely had that attitude of like, we do what we want, how we want it, when we want it. Because I don't know if, anyone else in the world has ever tried to tell my former business partner and the chef of Africola, Duncan Falcomo, what to do, but it doesn't really happen. So, I was really gifted this like unique opportunity to write my own set of rules. Because I was really like such a baby when I walked in there, like, to be like, when I took over Africola, like, I had no fucking idea what the good food guide really was. Like, I was as and then 2 years later, there I am, somehow standing on a stage shortly after Ben Shuri's been up there. Like, what? It let me make mistakes as well. Sometimes significant, sometimes insignificant, but it was a place to experiment and to be bold and take risks and learn to stand in who I am and what I am, and not be ashamed of that or not second guess it, and understand that you just have to make a decision sometimes, and whether or not it's the right call, you need to stand by that decision and accept it. That if you really want to move heaven and earth, you can do it, and that no one can tell you otherwise. And it's an important thing to have behind you. I don't know, would I ever go back and simultaneously do multiple festivals during a year while also running a restaurant? No, probably not. But it was important to learn and important to do. And it was just such a, the community that came with that, and, all the people I got to meet, and getting to do sort of things that other people dream about doing, I suppose. Like how lucky and how beautiful and how privileged is that? Yeah.
From your perspective, what makes a great service team and a great service experience? You mentioned about if you don't notice the service, then it's spot on. But how do you create that?
Yeah. Admittedly, I think you do. Maybe I phrased that wrong the first time. Like, good service shouldn't feel like obtrusive. Like, you'll remember it, but it shouldn't feel like it's uncomfortable or awkward. But it's bloody corny to say. I'm going to say it anyway because I've accepted that I'm a cheesy human being. So ultimately, what makes it good is love. However that is represented in who you are. You really have to love it and be in it 110%, because it's easy to know when you're not. Like the little lies come out in your body language, or, that fifth eye roll that you can't conceal anymore. Or if you just start blatantly doing it at the table, like it's, to me at least, like it's this unusual combination of finesse and a deep, deep, deep desire to want the best for other people. Because ultimately being a waiter is quite a pure act of service. And I think there's this idea that service means that you're not in control at all, or that you're at the lower end of the power spectrum, which just, to me at least, isn't accurate. I think that what we do holds a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, and it's being able to take that wonderful opportunity and that beautiful privilege that you have to be able to pass something good onto someone else by letting them rest whatever is heavy on you for a little while. Being able to fuse that with humor and kindness and Energizer Bunny level of ability to continue on is, to me, what makes good service. That innate ability to read people and know when to crack the joke and when to step back and when to be invisible and when to be present. It's a complete package, It's not necessarily about any one thing. You have to be able to process everything in the room at once, like know if it's about knowing where the weaknesses are, even in your own venue, like if you know that, I don't know, maybe you just, for whatever reason, you don't have the best wine list, making sure then that everything else is superb and on point. Or, knowing when to lean into the quirks of your own space. It's funny. It's like, it's a difficult thing to be good at, because ultimately I think it forces you to look at the flaws in other people and in yourself or in your venue, and then also celebrate the beauty in those things. And really that for me is what makes good service.
What was it like for you after that time that you gave yourself to heal? What was it like working in a restaurant again? You're at Templo at the moment, and having that balance. Is it quite different now?
Yeah, drastically different. I actually thought, it's funny, like I decided with Mona that I was going to take that events job because I was like, I don't know if I ever want to work in a restaurant again. Maybe that part of my life is over. I pushed it too far and I did too much damage, and it's irreparable now. And I'm still very much, healing. Like, I think it's an ongoing journey for life. And like, I just think it's important. I think I go to a psychologist every 2 weeks. And I just, I sort of treat it the same way I treat like flossing. Like, it's like a thing that you have to do that maybe you don't really want to, but it's important. And it's just for overall health is really valuable. But being back at Templo has actually been profoundly beneficial for me. Like I don't know if I just wanted to forget how much I loved it, how much I love being on the floor and being a waiter, because it is easy to kind of get bogged down in the negatives. But it's a very beautiful place to work. It's very serene. They've really cultivated like quite a good culture, and compared especially to Africola, which is just a beast, high energy, high octane, go all the time. Templo seats 20 people at once over 2 services. Like, the difference in pace is remarkable. So there is all of that extra time to really be able to sink comfortably down into sharing small moments with people who are coming in and being able to celebrate things with them or enjoy the space and enjoy the team that you're working with. And I enjoy the slowness and of it all. It's a real sweet, sticky slowness, and it's quite nice. And it was just nice to be back. I wasn't expecting to love it at all. I was like, well, this will just be a thing. Like, I'm going back to it out of necessity because I know how to do it. I know how to be a waiter. But it was like learning. It was like coming up for air, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for a year. It was quite nice to step back into it. Really important for me to do it.
What is it that you love about that front of house experience and delivering it?
Oh, bloody everything. I love the peculiar intimacy of it. Especially in Australia, where I think we tend to be a little bit, she'll be right. We're not immediately emotionally vulnerable, really, with people that we meet. I feel like there's a distinct sort of line in the sand, it feels to me, for Australian culture anyway, where like, you exchange like emotional things like with your close mates, and for everybody else it's like, how you going? Not bad. Or like, you never say what you really think or feel. And so being able to engage people softly in a dialogue where they do soften and open up over the course of a night, and you find out little things about them, and they become a fully realized human being in front of you, and you get to see the diversity of a population. Like, it's pretty amazing, and I don't think many people get to do that in their jobs. And I just think it's special, and it's what drives me to want to do it. And I really just love the idea so much of being able to alleviate the difficulties of life just for a moment. I just think it's so important. People need windows of escapism, especially now. And food and drink and, being in that it's the way we've always done it. It's such a tradition, and it's so much a part of who we are as humans that we just don't even see it for what it is. Dinner, sitting down to dinner, like whatever form breaking bread with somebody looks to you, like whatever shape that takes, it's ultimately achieving the same thing, which is connection and unity and an ability to root in where you are. And I feel like for a long time, especially like with like the world the way it is now, like we can kind of go anywhere, anytime, whenever we want. And I think that that's great in one way, because it means that we get to see and do all of these things that, would not have necessarily been accessible before. But I think it also makes the consequences sometimes of your actions less real, because you can just pick up and leave whenever you want and go traveling or go do this or go do that. Whereas if you're stuck somewhere, so say like during COVID now, like you realize that the way that you live your life is significant. And the things that you choose to do are significant, and long-term in a community, they do have a knock-on effect, and that community is important, and that who you eat with and spend your time with is important. Like, it's not a surprise to me that, during COVID lockdowns, that people immediately were like, I don't know how many fucking focaccias I saw, like goddamn banana breads, but like, like it was such a common thing. Like all of a sudden everyone's just like dropping focaccias off to their neighbors and looking actively for ways to continue to literally eat with people and connect with people. And the first option we went back to was like fucking literally bread and sharing that experience. Like, and so it's nice to be able to like facilitate that, I guess.
You're in Hobart now. Do you see yourself staying there for some time? Are you enjoying the local food scene and the life that you have there?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I've fallen into a good space with interesting people. There's lots of fascinating humans kicking around Hobart and loads of really good food. One of my favorite things lately has been the Migrant Resource Centre here. Man, so good. Very delicious. I think about it every day. But I don't know. I haven't. I think I'll definitely be here for at least a year, because I've, sort of made plans and committed to things at Templo. But other than that, I, for once, am enjoying. I don't have any plans. I don't have any obligations. I am free to just do whatever I want and go wherever, which I feel like is probably seems like a very useless thing to have during COVID. But I love cruel, delicious ironies, so I'm relishing in it. But it's just, I can, on my day off, I can wake up in the morning and no one's going to call me to tell me that there's something wrong or the glass washer needs replacing or any one of the things. I can just wake up and I can just be, and I can potter in the garden or do whatever it is I feel like. And that's been a freedom that I've never really experienced in my life. I've just always had a lot of responsibility. I'm not sure why. I must actively seek it out somehow, subversively somewhere. But I feel like Tasmania is a nice place to be away. It was a deliberate move to be geographically remote. I wanted time away from everything. And doing it at the most southern point I could, short of becoming a penguin and just moving to Antarctica, which I really did think about. Because I do love oily fish and to swim. But I don't know, I'm sort of enjoying this like slow, luxurious life where I get to basically be a very high functioning house cat who goes to work sometimes. So I don't know. I don't have plans. And COVID has really taught me that sometimes you know, like for me, just giving up control and going with things is hard. It's so hard for me. But I've learned that sometimes you just got to let life do its thing. I'm just going to see what falls on my doorstep. And that's pretty amazing, really. And I want to relish in that for as long as I can.
Well, I think that's an amazing place to be, Nikki, and we're absolutely honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble away as I want to do. It was really great. Thank you. That was a really beautiful opportunity. I really appreciate it.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.